Welcome back to Python by example. We are at session 7, and in this session, we want to have a look at dictionaries. Before we get into dictionaries, though, let's take a step back, going back to list and kind of see some of the challenges that we can end up with if we're only using list to represent data within the real world. So let's say, for example, I want to represent a student. And the student has 3 pieces of data which might be important to the student. So their name, their age, and their gender. If I'm going to use a list to store a student, then it means, for example, I could have a name like Jane. Jane would be 32, and her gender, obviously, is going to be female. So let's use F. And if I now want to represent Bob, then I would now put Bob. Bob is 29, and Bob obviously is a male. And if I want another female, let's say Sharon, and Sharon happens to be 24, and Sharon is a female. So what we have here is a list that can hold 3 student information. And I might want to, for example, list out the name of all students. So this means I would have to go through this list and pick out the name values. Now, because we know that each student data is made up of 3 items, then we would have to make use of that concept in terms of getting the names. And let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to create a loop. And in this loop, I'm going to have my index. And I'm going to have my range. So in this case, I'm going to allow range to go to 10. So I'm interested in the index value 0 to 9. And let me show you why. So this will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, so 0 to 8. So I could get away with 9. And the thing I want to bear in mind here is that Jane is at 0, Bob is at 3, and it means that Sharon would be at 6. So 0, 3, and 6. These are going to be the index positions, which are going to be important if I'm going to list out the names. So I'm going to go from 0 to 9. And let me be explicit with my starting point. And because I know that we need 0, 3, and 6 in terms of the indexes, then it means that I can increment each time by 3. And let's now print. And what we're going to print is student. And we're going to print index I. Because we are printing the variable, we're going to place it inside the squiggly. And let's now execute and see what obtains. So we have printed Jane, Bob, and Sharon as demonstrated in our output. Now, in terms of generating this list, we had to have some idea as to how the list was actually structured. In other words, we had to know that the name value is stored as the first item in the list. We also have to know that within the list, 3 data values which appear right next to each other will define a single student. And we have to use all of this information in terms of constructing an appropriate range value that will allow us to extract just the portion that we need. In this case, the portion was the name. If I wanted to display, for example, all the genders of the persons, or better yet, I want to display the name and the gender of the person, then I would have to make some adjustments to this. So we know that this already gives us the name. So now we are going to look at how can we get the gender. And once again, we have to go and do some sort of computation. So we know that this is 0, 1, then this is 2, 3, 4, this is 5, 6, 7, 8. So we know that we have 2, we have 5, and we have 8. So once again, we have to compute what the index was. And I think we ended up with 2, 5, and 8. So now we go back down to our print statement. Our variable name is student. And now we have to determine what the value of I is going to be. So it's going to be I. But remember, at this point, I would be 0. So I being 0 would give us Jane. And at the same time, we want to get what Jane's gender is. So at this point, it would be 2, 0, 1, 2. So therefore, we now have to add 2 to I so that we can get Jane. That's Jane's name and her gender. So let's try this and see what obtains. So we have now displayed the name and the gender of the persons within the file. And the point that we're making here is that we have to do computations in terms of determining what index values we are going to be using so that we can appropriately display these values. This method of operating or writing the code can be a bit time consuming. And what we're now going to do is look at another concept, another structure that we have at our disposal that might make life a little bit easier for us. So we still want to have a student, but this time we're going to define a student as being a dictionary. I'm going to use a new variable called student1, and I'm simply going to create a dictionary. Now, in order to create a dictionary, we use the curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, we're going to indicate the value, but we are going to attach each value to a key. What do I mean by that? If we go back to our list and we have a look at the value here, then that value is actually a name value. This value is actually an age value, and this value is actually a gender value. So in order to be consistent, we are going to make use of our fields that we had before. And we are going to build these fields into the dictionary. Now, a common word that you'll hear being used within programming languages is a record. And a record is a collection of data that relates to a single entity or object within the real world. And just to give an example, we can have a student, we can have a machine, and the machine, let's say it's a tractor. We could have something like a package. These are all examples of real world items that we would want to track in terms of our computer system. And we're saying that a record would enable us to capture these details. Another common definition for a record is that it is a collection of fields. And a field is nothing more than a variable that stores some data. So we have a collection of fields or variables that store data, and we're going to package them together in one so that collectively we have a unit that makes sense. That's exactly what we were trying to achieve when we indicated that these pieces of data or these data items were important to be captured, namely name, age, and gender. So we are going back to the concept of the dictionary, and we are now going to create a dictionary that we will use to actually represent a record. Remember, we said we need the key, we need the value. So in this case, the key is name, and the value would be Jane. We know that Jane is a string, so Jane is in double quotes. We also have age, and age is going to be 32. And I hope by now you see a pattern, and the pattern is each key is placed in double quotes as well. But the values, depending on what type of values they are, can either be in quotes or not in quotes. So for string, we have quotes. For numeric values, like we are looking at age in this case. Then for age, it will be numeric. For Jane, it will be a string. But also note, as I was mentioning earlier, that each time we have a key, the name, age, the key is placed in double quotes. Using that concept, we now want to talk about gender, or we want to store gender data. It means that the key gender is going to be in quotes. And the value is going to be in quotes as well, because the value is a string. So we have represented the data that we had above, where we started at Jane. At Jane's information, which includes the name, the age, and the gender. And we have just represented that in terms of student one. We have used a dictionary. We could do something similar for student two, but before I do that, let's just try and access this dictionary. So I'm going to do a print. Once again, it's going to be a formatted print. And this time, the variable is student one. And let's say I want to get the age. Then we student one, and inside square bracket, we simply put age. So let's print that and see if we are going to get what we anticipate. So let's run. And we are seeing that we have obtained the value 32. And if we map that back to what we have inside of the dictionary, we're actually seeing the value 32 was stored for the age. To avoid confusion, I'm going to comment out the codes at the top. So that we are only dealing with student one at the moment. So let's execute. And we're seeing right here that we have the value 32, as was already mentioned. If we now decided that we wanted to print the name of the person, then we would simply change the key. The key in this case would now be name. So we clear the output, let's re-execute, and we are seeing that we have Jane being stored. Now, what we started out with in terms of our comparison was a list that had in some data items. So we are going to use the concept of a dictionary and recreate the list that we had before. So it's going to be student equal. Once again, we have our list. But this is now going to be a list of dictionaries. Or to use a generic term, this is going to be a list of records. So inside this list, let me store Jane's information. And then I'm going to put a comma. And then I'm going to store Bob's information. So we need to change out the data values. So we now have Bob. We know that Bob's age is 29. And we know that Bob is a male. So we have changed out the data for Bob. And we know we had 3 records. So we also need a dictionary to represent Sharon. So once again, we are going to go in and make the necessary modifications. So it's Sharon. Sharon is 24, and Sharon's gender is a female. So there we have all right, so let's display and let's see what is going to happen. So in the example that we had above, we did a loop, and as we went through the loop, we were able to display the various elements within the list. And we saw how kind of tedious that was. So we want to know, see whether or not using this new structure, if it becomes any easier. So let's go again, and we are going to create a loop. So let's say for, and what we now want to get is an item from the list. Now, we already know that we can use the range command. So there are 3 dictionary items in this list. So for I in range, and we want to go from 0 straight up to 3, which means that we need to go to 4. Remember, with the range, we do not include the last value or the ending value. And each time we go through the range, we now want to get that dictionary item. So because it's a dictionary item, I'm just going to call it D. So D is going to be equal to student, and it will be student I. And when we get that dictionary from the student list, then we can now do our print statement. So it will be printf. This time, D is going to represent the dictionary. So it's going to be D, square bracket, and the name of the field in this case would be name, or the name of the field of the dictionary would be name. And let's try this quickly. So I'm going to expand back the output screen, and let's execute. So we have Jane, we have Bob, we have Sharon. So those are the data values that we wanted to print. And we had something here that says the index is out of range. And what that simply means is that I'm trying to loop too many times. So I'm going to drop from 4 to 3. And we'll see if that gets rid of the index error. So I drop from 4 to 3, we re-execute. And based on our output here, we're displaying Jane, Bob, and Sharon. Now, if we want to display the name of the person as well as the gender, then instead of having to compute what the index value is going to be, then we can simply take the dictionary, in other words, take the D that we're working with, and we simply change the key from name to age. So let's clear the output and let's try that again. And based on our output, we are able to see the name and the age for each person. And I'm sure you would agree that the code that we have here, even though we have written a bit more code, it is simpler to understand. We have 3 students being represented, so we are going to loop through the list 3 times. Each time we get a record from the list that we are storing inside of D. So D represents the record. And remember, in Python, a record is implemented as a dictionary. So it means that we are getting the dictionary from that position in the array. So we started at 0. So it means that the information that is stored here inside the first curly brackets is going to be the information that relates to the first item inside of the student list. And this first item is actually Jane's record. And we keep looping through the student list, and we keep getting records, and we keep displaying the content of the record. So I think that this is a simpler way whenever we want to be able to represent more complicated or more complex real world representations. And so we have at our disposal the concept of a list. We also have the concept of a dictionary. Now, note in this example, I've also included both of them together. So instead of just working with a list alone or a dictionary alone, I am now working with a list of dictionaries. And this gives us far more flexibility in terms of the kind of data that we can represent in a real world application. All right, the other thing that we want to have a look at, seeing that we have the dictionary, and similar to what we did with the list, we want to have a look at some of the operations that we can actually perform on this dictionary. So once again, I'm commenting out the codes that we don't need, and I'm just working with a single dictionary item or a single record so that we can make the concept a bit more clear. We may want to, for example, update the gender or the name. So let's say, for example, the person's name has changed. We can say student 1. We look at the key that we want to manipulate, which in this case is name, and we are changing the name to Tim. So that's the first thing that we're changing the name to Tim. But if we change the name to Tim, then we also need to change the gender. So it's going to be student 1, square bracket. This time we're targeting the gender. And the gender in this case would now be male. And maybe we want to change the age for Tim. So once again, it will be student 1. This time, the key is age. And we want him to be 41. Now we can do a printout of student one after it has been modified. And what we're going to look at this time is whether or not these data items have changed. So we're going to do a print when we have just created the, the dictionary. And we're going to do a print after we have modified the dictionary. So let's execute. And judging by the output, the first dictionary talks about Jane, who is a female whose age is 32. And the second dictionary, after the updates, that is talking about Tim. Tim age is 41 and Tim is a male. So we have successfully updated the dictionary by using the key as the tool by which we are making the updates. Another thing that we might want to do is to add, for example, add a new key value pair. So it's as simple as typing the dictionary, and then we determine in square brackets what the new key value pair is going to be. So let's say GPA. And let's say that the GPA is A. So if we re-execute and we compare both print statements, the first print statement displays for us Jane, age 32, and gender being a female. Whereas the second one, after we have done the updates, we have the name, which is Tim. We have the age, which is 41. So Tim, 41. We have the gender, which is a male. So the gender is a male. And we have the GPA. Now remember, this was not there before. So we have the GPA, and the GPA is an 8, which maps back to what we did in our code. So we have done some updates, and initially we had created the dictionary. And these are some of the key concepts you are going to need if it is that you want to manipulate your dictionaries. Now, one thing that we might want to do is to use a loop with a dictionary. So prior to this, we were using a loop with a list that contained dictionaries. But we can also use a loop just on the dictionary item alone. I'm just going to display that very quickly. So we can have something like for K and V in dictionary name is student one, and we say that items. And what that items does is it goes through the dictionary and gives us each key value pair. So let me just put that as a comment at the top. So items give us each key value pair. So let's see what exactly we're talking about. We're going to do a print. And each time we are going to print, let us print the key. And also let us print the value. So the value is going to be stored in the variable v. Remember, we need our double quotes. And I'm going to put a message so we can know what is the key and what is the value. So for the message here, let's say key. And for the value here, let's put val. All right, so let's try this out quickly. I need to get rid of some of the outputs that we don't need. So I can get rid of line 14 and I can get rid of line 19. Let's clear and let's re-execute. There's also another line I need to get rid of, which is line 21. And there we have it. So it's telling us the keys, or I have a extra bracket that I don't need. Let me get rid of that so that everything can be streamlined. And let me do a tab. So remember, \T gives us a tab. All right, so there we go. So we are looping through the dictionary, which is called student one. The dictionary has 3 keys and 3 values. So in terms of the keys, we know that we have name, we have age, and we have gender. And we're seeing the 3 keys here being displayed: name, age, and gender. And for the values, we have Jane, we have 32, and we have female. But we had updated it. So we had Tim, male, and 41. So that's why over here we are seeing Tim, we are seeing male, and we are seeing 41, because we had updated the, the values associated with each of these keys. But you have just seen how easy it is to write a loop that actually runs through all the dictionary items and gets the keys and the values from that particular construct. The point to remember here is that we need to be using the items keyword or the items operation. So that gives us access to each element, each key value pair within the dictionary. And we use variables to represent both the key and the value. Now, these are arbitrary variables, obviously, because a variable, it can be changed. And I'm using K for key, and I'm using V for value. As mentioned, these are arbitrary names. So you could have had key and value, for example, but then you'd have to make your adjustments inside of the print statement. I've just changed them. They are more descriptive, but my output is exactly the same. And what we have just done is to use a loop to get access to the items that are stored within the dictionary. Another way that we can use to get items from out of our dictionary is by making use of the pop command. So I will comment out my for, and I will simply say print f. We're going to do a formatted print. We know that we need our squiggly or our curly brackets. And inside the curly brackets, we are going to target the dictionary, which is student. And we're going to say student dot pop. Pop is going to remove a data item. And the data item that we want to pop is associated with the key, let's say, name. So let's try this. Let's clear, execute. And remember, we had updated the dictionary item. So it means that Tim is what is stored under the name key. In other words, if we pop name, then we end up back with Tim. And we're seeing that being displayed here on the screen. And if we wanted the gender for Tim, then it means that the key would be gender, and we would end up back with gender being male. All right, so let's try that. Scroll. And we're seeing here that we have the gender being male, which matches back with what we were talking about earlier in line 20. So that's the student, that prop operation. If we wanted to get rid of all the items from the dictionary, then we could use the clear operation. You would have seen that being used before. So it's student one, which is the dictionary dot clear. And I'm clearing before we do the prop. And remember, if I clear, then there's now nothing that is left inside the student container. In other words, we no longer have any keys and we no longer have any values. And that's why in this case, we are getting a key error, which says essentially that gender no longer exists. So when we're trying to pop gender here, that is going to be an illegal operation because we have used the clear command. And that means that all of the key value pairs that were present before inside of the dictionary would have been lost. And that takes us to the end of this particular session where we have kind of done an overview of dictionaries. And we have also tried to show how you can make use of these dictionaries within real world context. And this is the kind of thinking process that we want you to engender as you go through the module and as you interact with these various recordings, because it means that when it comes to your tutorial sheets or your worksheets that you have to be doing each week, then you'll have to apply all of these knowledge that you have been getting so far. Another thing to remember, and I think I say this about every week, is that you have to ensure that you're keeping up to date with the recordings. Because in each recording, we are making use of the concepts which have preceded the current recording. All right, so that's it for us for today. And see you in the next one. Take care.